My fiancée texted, "I'm not in love with you anymore." I replied, "Thanks for the heads up." Then I called off the wedding, sold her dress, and left town. 2 weeks later, she was begging in front of my parents. I, 32 was sitting in my cubicle reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. The text message that appeared on my screen would change everything. My fiancé of 3 years had sent me a message that read exactly, "I'm not in love with you anymore. I think we should call off the wedding." Just like that. No phone call. No face-to-face conversation. A text message. I stared at the screen for a full minute, watching the words blur as my eyes tried to process what I was reading. Around me, the office hummed with its usual Tuesday afternoon energy. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, colleagues discussing weekend plans. Everything normal except for the fact that my entire future had just been demolished in a single text message. My fingers moved almost automatically as I typed back a simple response. "Thanks for the heads up." I didn't send anything else. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg for an explanation. I didn't demand we talk it through. Something cold and calculating had taken over my mind, pushing aside the initial shock and hurt. I walked straight to my supervisor's office and told him I was taking the rest of the week off for a family emergency. He nodded sympathetically and told me to take care of whatever I needed to handle. If only he knew. The drive home felt surreal. We had been living together in a small apartment downtown for the past 2 years, splitting rent and bills like any normal couple planning a future together. The wedding was scheduled for exactly 6 weeks away. Invitations had been sent. The venue was booked. The photographer was confirmed. Her dress was hanging in our shared closet, still in its protective bag from the final fitting last weekend. I pulled into the parking space and sat in my car for a moment, gathering my thoughts. The hurt was starting to creep in around the edges of my numbness, but I pushed it down. I had things to do. She wasn't home when I walked into our apartment. Her work schedule had her at the hospital until 7, which gave me exactly 4 hours to execute my plan. I started with her belongings. Everything she owned went into boxes. Clothes, books, toiletries, the ridiculous collection of decorative pillows she insisted on keeping on our couch, her coffee mug collection, her yoga mat, her laptop charger, her vitamins from the bathroom cabinet. Everything. While I packed, I called my buddy from college who worked in real estate. I explained that I needed to break my lease immediately and asked if he knew of any short-term rental options outside the city. He told me about a cabin his family owned about 3 hours north that I could rent month to month. I told him I'd take it and asked when I could move in. He said the keys would be ready by tomorrow morning. Next, I called the wedding venue and explained that we needed to cancel due to unforeseen circumstances. The coordinator expressed her sympathy and informed me that due to the timing, we would forfeit the entire deposit and still owe 40% of the remaining balance. I told her I understood and would send payment within the week. The photographer was more understanding and agreed to return half of our advance payment since she could potentially book another event for our date. The caterer was the most expensive conversation. They had already ordered specialty ingredients and begun preparation work. I agreed to pay the cancellation fee without argument. I called the florist, the band, the transportation company we had hired for the wedding party. Each conversation was brief and businesslike. I absorbed every fee, every penalty, every cost without complaint. By the time I finished making calls, her belongings filled 8 large boxes stacked neatly by the front door. Then I turned my attention to the wedding dress. It hung in our bedroom closet like a ghost of future plans. She had spent months shopping for it, dragging me to appointment after appointment to look at fabrics and styles I couldn't tell apart. The final price tag had made me wince, but I had smiled and told her she looked beautiful because that's what you do when you're planning to spend your life with someone. I took the dress down from its hanger and laid it carefully in its original box. Then I drove to the bridal shop where she had purchased it. The sales associate remembered me from our previous visits and initially looked confused when I explained that I needed to return the dress due to a canceled wedding. She expressed her condolences and explained their return policy. Since the dress had been altered specifically for my fiancé's measurements, they could only offer me 40% of the original purchase price. I accepted without negotiating. The check I received felt heavier than its actual weight as I folded it and put it in my wallet. This wasn't about the money. This was about closing doors that couldn't be reopened. I stopped by my parents' house on the way back to the apartment. My mother took one look at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. I sat them down in their living room and explained the situation as simply as possible. The wedding was off. We were no longer together. I was moving away for a while to figure out my next steps. My father asked if there was anything they could do. I told them the most helpful thing would be to handle any wedding-related calls or visits that might come to their house over the next few weeks. I also asked them not to share my new address or contact information with anyone until I was ready to reconnect. My mother hugged me tighter than she had since I was a child and told me she loved me. My father shook my hand and told me he was proud of how I was handling the situation. I drove back to the apartment one final time. She still wasn't home. I loaded my own belongings into my car. 2 years of shared living condensed into what could fit in a sedan. Everything else could stay or be donated. None of it mattered anymore. I left her boxes stacked by the door with a simple note taped to the top one. Your things. Lease ends at the end of the month. Wedding is canceled. I also left a check on the kitchen counter covering my portion of the rent through the lease termination and half of the utilities for the final month. Even in my anger, I wasn't going to leave her financially stranded. My phone buzzed constantly during the 3-hour drive north. Call after call from her number. Text messages that I could see lighting up my screen but didn't read. I had nothing to say to her that hadn't already been said through our actions. The cabin was everything I needed it to be. Small, isolated, with enough space for me to think and figure out what came next. I spent the first night sitting on the porch, drinking beer and watching stars that were invisible from our apartment balcony downtown. My phone eventually stopped buzzing. The next morning, I drove into the small town near the cabin and found a temporary employment agency. They had several short-term positions available for someone with my background in finance and accounting. I accepted a 6-week assignment helping a local manufacturing company update their bookkeeping system. It felt good to focus on numbers and spreadsheets, problems with clear solutions and definitive answers. I ignored all calls and messages from my old life. The only people I maintained contact with were my parents, and that was limited to brief check-ins every few days to let them know I was safe. 2 weeks into my self-imposed exile, my mother called with an update I hadn't expected. She told me that my former fiancé had been calling their house daily, sometimes multiple times per day. At first, she had been demanding my contact information and accusing my parents of hiding me from her. When they refused to provide any details about my whereabouts, she had become increasingly desperate. According to my mother, she had shown up at their house 3 times in the past week. The first visit had been angry. She had accused me of being immature and dramatic for disappearing instead of working through our problems like adults. She had insisted that ending our engagement didn't mean we had to cut contact completely and that I was being unreasonable. My mother had politely but firmly told her that my decisions were my own and that she needed to respect my choice to step away from the situation. The second visit had been different. She had been crying and had asked my parents to help her understand why I had reacted so strongly to what she called a temporary uncertainty about our relationship. She explained that she had been feeling overwhelmed by wedding planning and had gotten scared about making such a big commitment. She insisted that her text message had been sent during an emotional moment and didn't represent her true feelings. My father had told her that sending such a significant message via text had probably not been the best way to communicate those feelings. The third visit had been the most desperate. She had arrived at my parents' house early in the morning and had refused to leave until they agreed to contact me on her behalf. She had begged them to tell me that she had made a mistake and wanted to work things out. She had cried on their front steps and had asked them to please help her fix what she had broken. My mother described how she had finally agreed to pass along the message, but had made it clear that she couldn't promise I would be receptive to hearing it. After hearing this update, I sat on the cabin porch for a long time thinking about the woman I had planned to marry. We had been together for 3 years. I had proposed to her on the anniversary of our first date, at the restaurant where we had shared our first meal together. She had said yes through happy tears and had called her mother immediately to share the news. We had spent countless evenings planning our future together, the house we would buy after the wedding, the trips we wanted to take, the possibility of children in a few years, whether we wanted to get a dog or a cat first. And she had ended all of that with a text message sent on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I had made the right choice. I called my mother back and asked her to deliver a message if my former fiancé contacted them again. I wanted her to know that I appreciated her reaching out, but that my decision was final. The relationship was over, the wedding was canceled, and I had no interest in reconciling or maintaining any form of contact. I also asked my mother to tell her that I wished her well and hoped she would find the happiness and certainty she was looking for, just not with me. My mother asked if I was sure about this decision. She reminded me that 3 years was a long time to spend with someone, and that people sometimes made mistakes when they were scared or overwhelmed. I told her I understood that perspective, but that some mistakes were too significant to overcome. The fact that she had chosen to end our engagement via text message told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed our relationship and my feelings. My mother said she would deliver the message if needed and asked when I might be coming home. I told her I wasn't sure yet. The temporary job was going well, and the company had mentioned the possibility of extending my contract if I was interested. The distance and change of scenery were helping me process everything that had happened and figure out what I wanted my life to look like moving forward. 3 days after that conversation, my mother called again. This time, her voice carried a different tone. She told me that my former fiancé had shown up at their house again, but this visit had been different from the others. Instead of knocking on the door, she had positioned herself on the sidewalk in front of their house with a handmade sign. The sign read, "Please help me contact him. I made a mistake and I love him." According to my mother, she had stood there for over 4 hours, holding the sign and approaching neighbors who walked by to ask if they knew how to reach me. Several people had called my parents to ask what was happening, and my father had eventually gone outside to ask her to leave. She had begged him to reconsider helping her make contact with me. She had promised that she only needed 5 minutes to explain what had really happened and why she had sent that text message. She had told him that she was willing to do anything to make things right between us. My father had repeated the message I had asked my mother to deliver, emphasizing that my decision was final and that continuing to contact my family was not going to change the outcome. She had finally left, but not before asking my father to tell me that she had realized I was the best thing in her life and that she would regret losing me forever. Hearing about her public display of desperation should have made me feel victorious. This was exactly the kind of dramatic reaction that proved I had been right to cut contact completely instead of getting drawn into emotional negotiations about our relationship. Instead, I felt nothing but sadness. Sadness for the relationship we had built and lost. Sadness for the future we had planned that would never happen. Sadness for the fact that it had taken losing me for her to realize she wanted to keep me. But sadness wasn't enough to make me reconsider my decision. I had learned something important about myself during those weeks in the cabin. I had learned that I was stronger than I had realized and that I didn't need to accept treatment that disrespected my worth as a partner and as a person. Someone who loved me and wanted to spend their life with me wouldn't end our relationship via text message. Someone who respected our partnership wouldn't make such a significant decision unilaterally and then expect me to be available for further discussion when they changed their mind. I asked my mother to make one final contact if my former fiancé reached out again. I wanted her to know that I understood she regretted her decision, but that understanding her regret didn't obligate me to provide her with an opportunity to fix what she had broken. I also wanted her to know that I hoped she would learn from this experience and treat her next relationship with the care and respect that serious commitments deserved. Update 1. 6 weeks after I had left town, my temporary assignment was coming to an end and I needed to make some decisions about my future. The manufacturing company had offered me a permanent position with a salary that was actually higher than what I had been earning at my previous job. The cost of living in the small town was significantly lower, and I had genuinely enjoyed the change of pace. More importantly, I had spent enough time away from my old life to gain some clarity about what I wanted moving forward. I decided to accept the permanent position and make my relocation official. I called my parents to let them know about my decision. My mother was supportive but asked if I was making this choice for the right reasons. She wanted to make sure I wasn't running away from my problems rather than dealing with them. I assured her that I had spent considerable time thinking about my motivations and that this decision was based on genuine excitement about new opportunities rather than avoidance of old problems. My father asked about the practical aspects of the move. I explained that I would need to return to the city briefly to handle some administrative details like updating my address with various institutions and retrieving a few remaining belongings from storage. During this conversation, my mother mentioned that they hadn't heard from my former fiancé in over 2 weeks. The last contact had been a letter delivered to their mailbox, asking them to forward it to me. I asked what they had done with the letter. My mother said they had held on to it in case I wanted to read it, but that they would respect my wishes either way. I thought about it for several minutes before deciding that I did want to read what she had written. Not because I was reconsidering my decision, but because I felt ready to hear whatever she had to say without it affecting my emotional stability. My mother agreed to mail the letter to my cabin address. It arrived 3 days later. A standard white envelope with my name written in her familiar handwriting. No return address. I waited until evening to open it, sitting on the cabin porch with a cup of coffee as the sun set behind the trees. The letter was 2 pages long, handwritten on simple notebook paper. She started by acknowledging that she had no right to expect me to read her words, but that she needed to try to explain what had happened from her perspective. She wrote about how the wedding planning had become overwhelming and how she had started to panic about making such a permanent commitment. She described feeling pressured by family members who kept asking about details like children and career plans that she felt unprepared to discuss. She admitted that she had been talking to a coworker who had recently gone through a difficult divorce and who had been sharing stories about how marriage had changed her relationship with her ex-husband. This coworker had apparently been encouraging her to really think about whether she was ready for such a big step. The day she sent the text message, she had been having lunch with this coworker who had asked her directly whether she was truly in love with me or just comfortable with our relationship. The question had rattled her, and she had spent the afternoon questioning her feelings and motivations. She wrote that sending the text message had been an impulsive decision made during a moment of panic and confusion. She had immediately regretted it, but had been too embarrassed and scared to call me directly to try to take it back. She had expected that I would demand an explanation and that we would have a big emotional conversation where she could explain her temporary panic and we could work through her concerns together. She had never expected me to simply accept her statement and disappear from her life completely. The letter went on to describe the aftermath of my departure, how she had returned to an empty apartment and had realized the magnitude of what she had lost, how she had spent the first week calling me constantly and leaving voicemails that became increasingly desperate. She wrote about discovering that I had canceled all the wedding arrangements and had handled every financial obligation without involving her. She described feeling shocked that I had managed to dissolve our shared life so efficiently and completely. She admitted that it had taken several weeks for her to understand that my swift and decisive response had been a form of self-protection rather than cruelty. The letter ended with an apology and an acknowledgement that she had learned important lessons about communication, commitment, and the consequences of impulsive decisions. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness and wasn't asking for another chance. She just wanted me to know that she recognized the gravity of what she had done and that she would carry the lessons from this experience into future relationships. She ended by saying that she hoped I would find happiness and that I would find someone who appreciated my loyalty and commitment in ways that she had failed to do. After reading the letter, I sat on the porch for a long time thinking about the person I had planned to marry and the relationship we had shared. Her explanation helped me understand her mindset, but it didn't change my assessment of the situation. Someone who truly wanted to spend their life with me wouldn't have ended our engagement based on a lunch conversation with a divorced coworker. Someone who respected our partnership would have shared their concerns with me directly rather than making unilateral decisions about our future. Most importantly, someone who understood the significance of the commitment we were making wouldn't have treated it as something that could be casually discarded and then retrieved when they changed their mind. I appreciated her apology and her acknowledgement of the lessons she had learned. I genuinely hoped she would apply those lessons to future relationships and find the happiness and certainty she was seeking. But her growth and insight didn't obligate me to provide her with an opportunity to demonstrate her improvement within our relationship. I wrote a brief response letter and asked my mother to forward it to her. I thanked her for her explanation and apology. I told her that I was glad she had gained some insight from our experience and that I hoped she would find happiness in the future. I also told her that while I understood her perspective, my decision remained unchanged. Our relationship had ended when she sent that text message, and no amount of explanation or regret could rebuild what had been broken. I wished her well and asked her to respect my choice to move forward separately from her. Update 2. 3 months after accepting the permanent position and officially relocating, I was settling into my new life quite well. The work was engaging, my colleagues were friendly, and I had started to build a social circle in the small town. I had joined a local hiking club and had started volunteering at a community center that provided financial literacy classes to high school students. For the first time since receiving that life-changing text message, I felt genuinely optimistic about my future. My parents visited me for a long weekend, and it was clear that they were relieved to see me thriving rather than just surviving. My mother commented that I seemed more relaxed and confident than I had been in years, even before the relationship had ended. During their visit, they updated me on a few developments back home. My former fiancée had apparently moved away from the city as well. According to mutual friends, she had accepted a transfer to a hospital in another state and had relocated about a month after our final exchange of letters. My parents had also heard through their network that she had been seeing a therapist to work through what had happened between us and to better understand her patterns and relationships. I was genuinely glad to hear that she was taking steps to grow from the experience and that she had found the geographic distance she probably needed to start fresh. My mother asked if hearing this news affected my feelings about the situation at all. I told her that I was happy she was working on herself and moving forward, but that it didn't change anything for me personally. My father mentioned that several people had asked them whether I might consider moving back to the city eventually. He said they had been telling people that I was building a good life where I was and seemed content with my decision to relocate. I confirmed that this was accurate. While I wasn't opposed to the possibility of returning to the city someday, it would be based on positive opportunities rather than nostalgia for my old life. During the months that followed my parents' visit, I continued to build my new life with intentional focus on the things that brought me genuine satisfaction. The financial literacy classes I taught became one of my favorite activities. There was something deeply satisfying about helping young people understand concepts that would serve them well throughout their adult lives. Several of my students had started coming to me for advice about college financing and career planning. Through the hiking club, I met people who shared my interest in outdoor activities and who introduced me to trails and camping spots I never would have discovered on my own. The physical activity and time in nature were providing mental health benefits that I hadn't anticipated. I also started taking a pottery class at the community center, something I had always been curious about, but had never made time for during my previous life. Working with Qley turned out to be incredibly meditative and provided a creative outlet that balanced the analytical nature of my work. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.